The rain had been falling since noon, and, by the time evening settled over Velmore City, the streets were slick and cold, the kind of cold that gets into your bones and stays there. Most people had gone inside hours ago. The sidewalks were empty except for the gutters running fast with dirty water and the occasional umbrella bobbing past a lit shop window. Marcus Draven stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, 42 floors above the street, watching the city drown. He was not the kind of man who concerned himself with rain. He was not the kind of man who concerned himself with much of anything that didn't involve power, money, or the delicate, centuries-old politics of the vampire world he had inherited at the age of 31. Now, at what appeared to be 35, though the truth was considerably more complicated, he ruled the Draven bloodline with a precision that left no room for sentiment. His family had been in Velmore for over 200 years. The city didn't know that, of course. The city knew the Draven name only as old money, the kind that doesn't need to advertise. Real estate, finance, a shipping company that had quietly dominated the eastern coast for generations. The humans saw the buildings with Draven's name on them. They didn't see anything else. Marcus liked it that way. He was on the phone when his assistant, Renata, knocked twice and opened the door without waiting for a response. Renata had worked for him for 11 years, long enough to know that 2 knocks was a formality and waiting was not. She held a tablet against her chest and her expression was careful in a way that made Marcus end his call mid-sentence. "What?" he said. Not a question. A command shaped like one. "It's your mother, sir." Something moved in Marcus's chest. Not many things could move it. His mother was one of them, though he would never say so out loud, not to Renata, not to anyone. Ilara Draven was 314 years old. She looked, on a good day, like a woman in her mid-50s, silver hair she kept long, pale skin that seemed lit from somewhere inside, and eyes the color of winter fog. She had survived things that would have destroyed lesser vampires. She had survived the purge of 1842, the political collapse of 3 bloodline alliances, the death of Marcus's father, and the 40 quiet years she spent rebuilding everything that loss had taken from her. She was not soft. She was not fragile. She was the woman who had taught Marcus that power was a tool, not a trophy, and that a ruler who confused the two deserved neither. She was also, Marcus would admit only to himself in the dark of his own mind, the only person in the world whose opinion of him mattered. "What about her?" he said. Renata turned the tablet toward him. The screen showed a grainy feed from a street camera, the kind the city had on every corner, the kind Marcus had quiet access to through channels no one asked questions about. The timestamp read 9:47 p.m. The location tag read Millward Street, District 9. District 9 was not a place Ilara Draven went. But there she was, unmistakable even through the rain and the camera grain, that silver hair, that particular way she held herself, upright and still while everything around her moved. She was standing under the narrow overhang of a shuttered laundromat, and she was not alone. Beside her, sharing the 2 feet of dry concrete, was a girl. Marcus leaned forward. The girl was young, early 20s at most, and it was immediately, painfully obvious that she had nowhere to go. The bag at her feet was soaked through. The jacket she wore was too thin for the season and had a tear along the left shoulder. She was sitting on the ground with her back against the laundromat wall, knees pulled to her chest, and she was not looking at Ilara. Ilara was looking at her, though. That part was what made Marcus's expression change. Not by much. A slight tightening around his eyes, a shift so small that only Renata, who had spent 11 years studying his face, would have noticed it. But it was there. Because what was on his mother's face, even through the grain of the camera, was not the careful neutrality she wore in public. It was something softer. Something she hadn't shown anyone in a very long time. She sat down. Ilara Draven, 3 centuries old, first of her bloodline, sat down on the wet concrete of Millward Street next to a girl she had never met and leaned slightly, quietly, as if she wasn't quite sure she was allowed to, against the wall beside her. Marcus stared at the screen for a long moment. "Get the car," he said. The girl's name was Sophia. Sophia Marin. She would have told him that herself if he'd asked, but when Marcus arrived on Millward Street 18 minutes later, stepping out of the black car in the rain without an umbrella because he genuinely didn't care about getting wet, she wasn't looking at him. She was looking at his mother. Ilara glanced up at Marcus the way she always did, like she'd known he was coming and had simply been waiting for him to arrive. There was no embarrassment on her face. No apology. She looked at him with those winterfog eyes and said, quietly, "She's cold." That was it. That was the whole explanation. Marcus looked at the girl, Sophia, who was now looking at him with an expression he recognized, the particular face of someone who has learned not to expect anything from a stranger's arrival. Not hope, not fear. Just waiting. She had dark hair plastered against her face from the rain. Brown eyes, sharp in that way that happens when you've had to pay attention to the world for a long time because the world stops giving you chances when you stop paying attention. There was a cut on her left hand, 2 days old from the look of it, wrapped in a strip of cloth that had once been white. He noticed the cut. He noticed the bag. He noticed the jacket. He also noticed, because Marcus Draven noticed everything, that she was not afraid of him. Most people were, even without knowing why. Something in the way he occupied space tended to trigger a primal discomfort in humans, something below the level of thought, the ancient part of the brain that had once been very good at knowing which shadows to avoid. Sophia looked at him and felt none of it, or if she felt it, she'd long since stopped caring about the things that made her afraid. "You're on the ground," Marcus said to his mother. His voice was neutral. It was a statement. "Yes," Ilara agreed. "In the rain. It's not raining under here." He looked at the overhang. She was technically correct. He looked back at his mother and then at Sophia and then at the general situation, which was not a situation he had a protocol for. In 200 years of Draven bloodline management, no protocol had ever been written for this. "Come," he said finally. Not warmly. But not without intention either. Sophia looked at him. Then, at Ilara. Ilara had not moved to stand yet. She was still sitting beside the girl, and her expression said, very clearly, without words, "She comes too." "Both of you," Marcus said, before his mother had to say it. Sophia looked at them for a long moment, this silver-haired woman who had sat down beside her without asking anything, and this tall, cold-eyed man who had arrived without explaining himself and was now offering something she couldn't quite name. She had been on the streets of Velmore for 3 weeks. She had learned to read offers quickly. She had also learned that some offers came with costs she couldn't afford. This one, she couldn't read. And that was either very bad or something else entirely. She picked up her bag. The drive to the Draven estate took 25 minutes. Nobody spoke. Marcus sat in the front with his driver, which was unusual. He had done it intentionally. The back of the car belonged to Ilara and Sophia, and whatever was happening between them, he wasn't sure he understood it yet, needed space he wasn't going to intrude on. In the side mirror, he watched them. Ilara sat upright, as she always did. But she had given Sophia the blanket from the back seat compartment, and she was watching the city go by with the particular look she sometimes got late at night, in the family house, when she thought no one could see her. Marcus had seen it, over the years. He'd never known what it meant. He was starting to form a theory. Sophia held the blanket around her shoulders and also looked out the window. She wasn't trying to figure out where they were going. She had already decided something and was done deliberating. That kind of quiet in a person, Marcus knew, was not peace. It was exhaustion past the point of anxiety. He had seen it in soldiers. He had seen it in refugees. He had never expected to see it in a girl in her 20s being driven through his city in his car. The theory he was forming about his mother was becoming more specific. The Draven estate was on the northern edge of the city, behind a gate that most people never noticed because it was designed that way. Stone walls, old trees, a house that looked like it belonged to a different century because it did. Sophia stepped out of the car and looked up at it with an expression Marcus couldn't read in the rain. Ilara took her inside. Marcus stood in the driveway for a moment after they'd gone in, rain on his shoulders, looking at the door. He went inside. Ilara put Sophia in the east guest room, the warmest one, the one that faced the garden, with the deep window seat and the radiator that actually worked. She came down to the kitchen afterward, where Marcus was standing at the counter with a glass of something that was not wine, and she sat across from him at the long oak table and folded her hands. Marcus waited. She was sitting there when I came past, Ilara said. She'd been there a while. I could tell. You came past District 9, Marcus said. On foot. I walk sometimes. You've never walked through District 9 in the 300 years I've known you. Ilara was quiet for a moment. She reminded me of someone. Marcus didn't ask who. He waited. Myself, Ilara said. A very long time ago. Before everything. Before the bloodline and the alliance and all of it. She looked at her hands. There was a winter. 1731, I've told you almost nothing about that winter. No, Marcus said. You haven't. I sat on a street very much like that one, Ilara said. For 3 days. No one sat with me. The room was quiet. The rain on the windows was loud. Marcus looked at his mother, really looked at her, the way he rarely allowed himself to, because looking at her clearly meant acknowledging things he kept at a careful distance. 314 years. She had been sitting on a street somewhere when she was young, before she was powerful, before she was Ilara Draven, and no one had sat with her. Tonight she had sat with someone. He thought about the camera feed. The way she'd leaned against the wall. The way she had looked, briefly, like something other than what she'd spent centuries becoming. She can stay, Marcus said. The words came out before the decision was fully formed, which was unusual for him. He generally didn't speak before the decision was formed. Until she has somewhere to go. A real somewhere. Not a shelter. Ilara looked at him. He picked up his glass. She's cold, you said. Ilara's expression did something quiet and complicated. Yes, she said. She is. Upstairs, in the east guest room, Sophia Marin lay on a bed that was too soft and too warm and too safe, and she stared at the ceiling. She had been through enough to know that safe was a feeling you couldn't trust the first night. She had been through enough to know that people who offered things always wanted something back. But the silver-haired woman had sat down beside her on the ground in the rain and asked for nothing. Not her story. Not her gratitude. Not her name. She had simply sat there, like it was the most natural thing in the world to do, like she had nowhere else she needed to be, like Sophia sitting there alone in the cold was reason enough. Sophia looked at the ceiling for a long time. Then, she slept. Really slept, for the first time in 3 weeks, with both hands flat on the warm blanket and her wet jacket hanging over the chair to dry and something she didn't have a word for sitting quietly in the middle of her chest. Outside, the rain kept falling. The city ran with water. 42 floors up, Marcus Draven's penthouse was empty. He had not gone back. He stayed. And, in the morning, everything would be different, though none of them knew yet exactly how, or what it was going to cost them, or what was already in motion out there in the dark city, looking for exactly the kind of weakness that a vampire king sitting in his family kitchen at midnight, thinking about his mother and a girl he didn't know, had just made himself. But that was morning. Tonight, the house was warm, and the east room window faced the garden, and Sophia Marin was sleeping. That was enough. Sophia Marin had a rule about mornings. The rule was simple: figure out where you are before you open your eyes. Feel the surface you're on. Listen for the sounds. Smell the air. Build the picture before you have to look at it, so that when reality arrives, it can't surprise you. She had made this rule in the second week, when she'd woken up in a shelter and, for 4 full seconds, had believed she was home, in the apartment on Crane Street, in the bed she'd had since college, and those 4 seconds had been the worst 4 seconds of the whole 3 weeks. So she kept her eyes shut and she built the picture. Surface, mattress, real one, deep and warm. Not a shelter cot, not a floor. Sheets that had been washed recently. Pillow that didn't smell like 40 other heads. Sound, rain, still. Quieter than last night. The particular quiet of a house that is old and large and well-built, the kind of quiet that insulates. Smell, coffee. Actual coffee, not the watery burned kind from the shelter machine. Something good. And, beneath that, something she couldn't identify, something that reminded her of old books and stone and outside air, the smell of a house that had been standing a very long time. She opened her eyes. The ceiling was high. Crown molding, painted white, a little worn at the corners. The window was large and the light coming through it was gray and soft. The garden outside was wet and green and the trees were very old. She lay there for a moment, cataloging. Her jacket was dry. Her bag was on the floor where she'd left it, untouched. The room was warm. The door was closed but not locked. She'd checked that before she fell asleep, 2 fingers on the handle, a habit she'd developed in the second week. She got up. The kitchen of the Draven house was the kind of kitchen that had been built to feed a staff of 20 and hadn't been redesigned since. Long counters, dark wood cabinets, a stone floor worn smooth in the pathways where generations of feet had traveled the same routes. There were modern appliances that looked slightly uncomfortable in the space, like visitors who'd dressed up for an occasion and couldn't quite relax. A woman Sophia didn't recognize was making coffee. Not Ilara. This woman was younger looking, with a sharp face and the kind of posture that said she had been around difficult people long enough that her body had learned to stay ready. She glanced at Sophia when she came in without any surprise, which meant she'd been told. She pointed at the table without saying anything. Sophia sat. The coffee appeared in front of her. Then, toast. Then, eggs that had been made properly, not the gray rubbery kind. "Thank you," Sophia said. The woman, she'd find out later her name was Petra, the estate's housekeeper for going on 30 years, made a sound that wasn't quite a response and went back to what she was doing. It wasn't unfriendly. It was the sound of someone who had decided Sophia was not a problem without needing to make a whole speech about it. Sophia drank the coffee and looked at the room and thought, carefully, about her situation. She had been in the house of people she didn't know. People who were, by any reasonable measure, extremely wealthy. The silver-haired woman had sat down beside her on the ground in the rain and brought her here. The man, tall, dark, careful eyes, the kind of face that gives nothing away even when it's giving you everything you need to know about the person, had said both of you without warmth but also without hesitation. As if it had cost him nothing. Sophia had spent enough time reading people in difficult circumstances to know that when something costs someone nothing, it usually costs something. She just hadn't found what yet. She was finishing her second cup of coffee when Marcus Draven walked in. He was dressed differently than last night, suit jacket, no tie, which on him still looked like a uniform, and he was reading something on his phone and he did not look up when he entered, which meant that when he registered Sophia sitting at his kitchen table eating his eggs in his dead grandmother's chair, the adjustment was small and internal and you could only see it in the 1-second pause before he moved to the counter. "Sleep," he said. Still not a question. "A check." "Yes," Sophia said. "Good." He poured coffee. He leaned against the counter the way men do when they are deciding whether to sit down and haven't committed yet. He looked at her, that careful look, the one that took inventory. Sophia looked back at him. She had decided, sometime in the night between sleep and waking, that being afraid of this man was a luxury she couldn't afford and also beside the point. Whatever he was, and there was something about him, she'd felt it in the car, some frequency slightly outside the range of what people were supposed to be. He had let her sleep in a warm room and not touched her bag. That was more than most people had given her. "You have a cut," he said. Glancing at her hand. "It's fine." "It's 2 days infected," he said. "Petra will sort it." Petra, from across the kitchen, made the same sound as before. This time it meant yes. "You don't have to do that," Sophia said. "I'm aware." He picked up his phone again. Not dismissive, he had already taken her in and processed her and moved to the next thing, the way efficient minds do. "My mother wants to speak with you. When you're ready. There's no timeline." He laughed. Sophia looked at the door he'd gone through, then at Petra, who was applying antiseptic to a cotton pad with the businesslike focus of someone who had cleaned wounds before and had opinions about people who let them go. "Is he always like that?" Sophia said. "Like what?" said Petra. Sophia thought about it. "Like a person who could run a country but would rather not explain himself." Petra looked at her for the first time with something that wasn't entirely neutral. "Sit still," she said, taking Sophia's hand. It wasn't an answer. But the corner of her mouth did something. Ilara Draven was in the library. The library was a room that told you everything about the family if you knew how to read it, floor-to-ceiling shelves, books in 6 languages, gaps where other books had been pulled and not returned, reading chairs near the windows positioned to catch the afternoon light. A room used by someone who read seriously and consistently and for a long time. The oldest books had spines that Sophia, who had studied literature for 2 years before her scholarship ran out, recognized as 17th century at least. Ilara was in the chair nearest the window with a book open in her lap, but she wasn't reading. She looked up when Sophia came in, and her face did what it had done last night on the street, that softening that looked like it surprised even her. "Sit," she said. "Please." Sophia sat in the chair across from her. Between them, a small table with a pot of something herbal that Sophia didn't recognize. They looked at each other for a moment. Sophia had been trying to figure out Ilara Draven since last night, and the problem was that Ilara didn't fit into any category Sophia knew. She was not a charity case. She was not a social worker. She was not a rich woman doing something performative. She had sat down on a wet sidewalk in a designer coat because she'd wanted to, and she hadn't asked for anything in return, not even a conversation, and that was so far outside Sophia's experience of how the world worked that she didn't have a framework for it. "I won't ask about your situation unless you want to tell me," Ilara said. "That's not why I wanted to speak." Sophia waited. "I wanted to apologize," Ilara said. That wasn't what Sophia expected. "For what?" "For last night. For bringing you here without properly explaining what here is, or who we are, or what you were agreeing to." Ilara's voice was even and unhurried, the voice of someone who had learned, across a very long time, that truth delivered carefully was a kindness. "You had a right to know more than I gave you. You gave me a dry place to stand," Sophia said. "And then, a warm room." "Yes. But that doesn't cover the gap." Ilara looked at her hands. "This house, and this family, and the people in it, we are not ordinary. I would like you to know that, clearly, so that whatever you decide about staying or going, you make that decision with open eyes." Sophia thought about the way the car had felt last night. The frequency. The slight wrongness she'd felt in Marcus Draven's presence that wasn't fear, exactly, but was something the body says when it is near something older than it knows how to process. "Not ordinary how," she said. Ilara looked at her. That gaze winter fog, very still, very clear. "There's a longer answer and a shorter one," Ilara said. "The short answer is that my family has been in this city for over 200 years and we are different from what humans expect. Not dangerous to you. But different in ways that you will notice, and I would rather you notice with context than without." Sophia sat with this for a moment. She was 23 years old. She had lost her apartment, her job, and the last of the savings she'd scraped together in the space of 6 weeks, one thing pulling the next thing down the way a loose thread takes a seam. She had slept in 4 different places in 3 weeks, none of them safe in the way safety is supposed to feel. She had spent 3 weeks learning that the city she'd lived in for 5 years did not see her anymore. Last night a woman had sat down beside her on the ground in the rain and asked for nothing. "I noticed," Sophia said. "Last night. There was something." Ilara nodded, unsurprised. "You're perceptive." "I've had to be." Another quiet. Ilara poured tea into the second cup on the table and set it in front of Sophia without asking if she wanted it. "I would like to help you," Ilara said. "Not because you need help, or because you were in a bad situation, or because it's a good thing to do. Those are all true, but they're not the reason." She paused. "I sat on a street very much like the one I found you on, a long time ago. No one sat with me. I've thought about that for a long time. Sophia looked at her. I would like to fix that, Ilara said. In the only way it can be fixed, which is not to fix mine but to not let it happen to someone else. She looked at Sophia directly. That's the whole reason. Nothing else. Sophia didn't say anything for a moment. She picked up the tea. Okay, she said. What happened in the following 10 days was not dramatic, which is sometimes how the most important things happen. Sophia stayed. She was given access to the house without rules and without surveillance, which she tested quietly in the first few days and found to be genuine. She found the cut on her hand cleaned properly and healing by day 3. She found that Petra, who communicated mostly in pragmatic actions and the occasional grunt, left extra food in the kitchen after dinner in case Sophia came down late. She found that the library was genuinely available to her, and she spent 2 mornings there before she'd worked up to taking books back to her room. She found that she barely saw Marcus. He was in the house, she could feel the particular gravity of his presence from 2 floors away, that frequency she'd noticed the first night, stronger inside the building than it had been in the rain. She caught glimpses, at the end of hallways, through partly open doors, once at 2 in the morning when she went down to the kitchen and found him at the counter reading documents and he glanced up and they looked at each other for a moment and then she made tea and he went back to his documents and neither of them said anything. She was trying to decide what to make of him. He was not warm. He was not cold either, exactly cold implied a temperature, and Marcus Draven gave off the impression of a temperature that was simply beyond the scale she was used to measuring on. He was precise. He noticed everything. He had authorized her staying without explanation and without apparently requiring one from her, and the only indication he'd thought about it at all was a brief conversation she'd overheard in the hallway on day 4, when he'd told Renata, the assistant, to run a quiet check on Sophia's previous employment and arrange something in that direction without letting it look arranged. She'd stopped walking when she heard that. Stood in the hallway and processed it. He was trying to help her in a way that didn't announce itself as help. Like he knew that unsolicited charity that puts itself in your face is harder to accept than help that just appears in the form of opportunity. Like he'd thought about the mechanics of it. She didn't know what to do with that. She filed it. It was Ilara who, on the 9th day, showed her the other thing. She'd come down late past midnight, restless in the way that sometimes follows a stretch of safety, the body releasing tension it had been holding so long it had forgotten it was holding it, and found the library light on. Ilara was at the window, not sitting this time, standing with her back to the room, looking at the garden. The light in the library was wrong. That was the first thing. It was warmer than lamplight and it seemed to be coming from Ilara herself, not obviously, not the kind of thing you'd see if you looked directly at it, but, from the corner of the eye, something luminous. The second thing, Ilara had known Sophia was there before she turned. The way she turned was not the turn of someone reacting to a sound. It was the turn of someone who had been waiting. I thought you might come down tonight, Ilara said. She was not surprised. She was not anything except present. Sophia stood in the doorway. Why? You've been processing. Ilara looked at her. You overheard Marcus on the 4th day. Sophia didn't ask how she knew that. Yes. And you've been deciding whether it changes things. Does it? Ilara considered. He does what he does for reasons that are his own. I won't speak for them. She moved to the chair, sat, settled. But his reasons are not as cold as his face suggests. They never have been. Sophia came in and sat down. The library at midnight felt different from the library in the afternoon, more itself, maybe. More honest. What are you? She said. Not hostility. Genuine. Ilara looked at her for a long moment. She seemed to be weighing something. Old, she said finally. And more complicated than that word covers, but it's where it starts. She folded her hands. I told you we are different. The difference is significant. And I want to tell you the truth of it, because you've been in this house 9 days and you deserve to know what kind of house it is. Tell me, Sophia said. Ilara told her. She did not tell her all of it at once. She told her in the way things are told when they are true and large and have to be received, not just delivered slowly, with space left between the parts for Sophia to breathe in, think and ask questions. She told her about the bloodline, the age of it, the nature of what they were, the way the world had existed for centuries in layers that humans moved through without seeing. She told her about 1731. She told her almost nothing about that winter, but she told her enough. She told her about the girl she had been before the bloodline and the power and the long centuries, before she learned how to be what she was. Sophia listened. She didn't faint. She didn't run. She sat in the library chair at midnight and she listened to a 300-year-old woman tell her the truth with the steady attention of someone who had learned, the hard way, that reality as it is tends to be more survivable than the version of it you imagined. When Ilara was done, the house was very quiet. Okay, Sophia said, the same word she'd said 9 days ago over tea, and meant something different by it now, something larger. Ilara looked at her and that complicated softening moved across her face again. You're not afraid, Ilara said. Quiet. Almost wondering. I've been afraid for 3 weeks, Sophia said. Of things that are actually in my life. I don't have room for fear of things that haven't hurt me. Outside the library window, in the dark garden, something moved between the old trees, a shape, upright, unhurried. Sophia looked and saw Marcus, walking in the garden in the dark, alone, his back to the house. She wondered how long he'd been out there. She wondered if he knew that tonight was the night his mother had told her, had decided this was when Sophia was ready to know. She wondered if he had simply trusted Ilara's timing the way he seemed to trust Ilara in most things, and had taken himself outside so the house would feel like space enough. She thought it was probably that. She looked at the shape of him in the dark garden, walking among trees that were older than most countries, and, she thought, there is something happening here that I don't have the whole shape of yet. She also thought, I am not afraid of it. Those two things sat together in her chest, and she held them carefully, and the rain had stopped hours ago, and the night was still, and somewhere above the old trees the sky was beginning, at its very edge, to show the first pale evidence of a new morning. Things were moving. Out in the city, in places Sophia didn't know yet, things that had been set in motion long before she'd ever sat down on that sidewalk on Millward Street were moving toward this house, toward this family, toward the strange new shape of something that had no name yet. But she didn't know that yet. She sat in the library. The night held. Ilara poured more tea. In the garden, Marcus walked among the old trees and did not look back at the window. Not yet. The letter arrived on the 14th day. It came by courier old-fashioned, which was itself a message, a deliberate choice that said I know your customs and I'm choosing not to honor them. Petra took it at the door and brought it to Marcus in the study, and, when he saw the seal on the envelope, the particular dark wax embossed with a mark he hadn't seen in 23 years, he set down his pen and held the envelope without opening it for a long moment. Renata was in the room. She looked at his hands, which had gone very still. Who? She said. Victor Kane, Marcus said. Renata's expression shifted in a way she usually controlled better. He's been silent for 23 years, Marcus said. Yes. He opened it. The letter was 2 paragraphs. Victor Kane had never wasted language. He wrote the way men write when they know their words will be read many times, which meant the words were chosen to hold up under scrutiny and deliver, on the 5th or 6th reading, things that weren't visible on the first. The first paragraph was pleasantries. Not warm ones. The kind of pleasantries that are a throat being cleared before the real sentence. The second paragraph said, I understand you have a guest. I look forward to meeting her. Marcus put the letter down on the desk. He sat very still for a moment, in the particular way he went still when something had touched the cold center of him, not anger, not fear, something older and, more specific, the feeling of understanding, all at once, that a situation he thought he had visibility on was actually much larger and had been much larger for some time. Victor Kane did not take notice of things without reason. Victor Kane had not been silent for 23 years and, then, broken silence over a girl on a sidewalk unless the girl on the sidewalk was not, in any version of reality, a coincidence. He stood. He went to the window. He looked at the garden. Sophia was in the garden. She was sitting on the low stone wall that edged the old flower beds, a book open in her lap that she was not reading, her face turned toward the trees in the way she sometimes looked at things when she was thinking hard about something she wasn't ready to name. It had been 14 days since he'd pulled up on Millward Street and found his mother sitting on the ground beside her. In 14 days, Sophia Marin had gone from someone he'd made a decision about to something he hadn't accounted for in any of the frameworks he used to make decisions. She didn't frighten easily. That was the first thing he'd noticed. The second was that she had a mind that worked fast and filed accurately and didn't ask questions for show. When she asked something, it was because she'd already thought about it from 3 sides and needed the fourth. The third thing was something he'd noticed more slowly, in the way you notice things that are inconvenient. She had started, in small and unannounced ways, to make sense to him. Not in a strategic sense. Not the way his advisors made sense, or the way his allies made sense, calculations he could run and audit and predict. In the way that she'd come down to the kitchen at 2 in the morning and hadn't said anything and he'd found that he didn't want her to. In the way she talked to his mother. In the particular texture of her silence. These were not thoughts he'd asked for. He'd noted them and moved on. He was skilled at that. Victor Kane's letter was not something he could move on from. He went out to the garden. Sophia looked up when he came through the garden door and did the thing she did, that one-beat assessment, that quick inventory, file and adjust. She'd stopped pretending not to do it around him, which meant she'd decided he could handle knowing he was being read. He had no objection. Something happened, she said. Yes. He came to the wall. Didn't sit. He didn't often sit outside. It made him feel architecturally incorrect, somehow, out of place without the geometry of a room around him. Someone is aware you're here. She looked at him steadily. Who? A man named Victor Kane. He is, Marcus chose the word carefully. He is to our world what I am to this family. But, older. More deeply embedded. He runs things you don't have visibility on and I have partial visibility on, which is a gap I've never been able to close. He looked at the garden. He's been absent for 23 years. His letter broke that silence to mention you. Sophia was quiet. He could see the thing happening in her face that happened when she was processing something at speed, not panic, just computation. Why would he know about me, she said. That is exactly the right question. Do you have an answer? Not yet. He looked at her. But, I need one quickly, which means I need to know things I haven't asked you yet. She looked back at him. The garden was quiet, the old trees making their slow decisions about the wind. Ask, she said. He asked her. Not rudely, not as an interrogation. He had interrogated people before and this was not that. He was consciously aware of keeping it from being that, which meant he was consciously aware of what he was doing in a way that was unusual for him. He asked about her family, her history, where she came from before Velmore. He asked about the apartment she'd lost, the job before it, the 6 weeks of one thing collapsing into the next. Sophia answered. Methodically, accurately, without the careful omissions people usually made when they told stories about hard periods. She'd apparently decided that precision was worth more to her than the protection of her own narrative. Her family was from the South. Her father's name was Emilio. Her mother, Lucia, had died when Sophia was 12. She'd come to Velmore on a scholarship to study literature. The scholarship had lasted 2 years, the part-time work had stretched to full-time and, then, to 2 jobs and, then, the second job had ended and, the first job had ended 3 weeks after that and, the savings had lasted 6 weeks and, then, there was Millward Street. Emilio Marin, Marcus said. Sophia looked at him. He said it carefully. Emilio Marin. From the South. Does he have a connection to? He stopped. To what? Sophia said. To an older family. Something with history. Sophia looked at him for a long time. He never talked about his family. He said they were gone. He said there was nothing to talk about. He said it the way people say things when they mean, ask this again and I'll leave the room. A pause. I stopped asking when I was about 15. Marcus stood very still. What is your father's mother's name? Sophia frowned. I never met her. He said she died before I was born. A beat. Her name was Kara. Kara Marin, I think. Why? The garden was very quiet. Marcus Draven, who did not show things on his face, showed something on his face. It was brief and careful, and Sophia almost missed it, but she didn't, because she was Sophia. What? She said. Kara Marin was not her birth name, Marcus said slowly. She changed it. In 1962. Before that she was, tell me. Kara Valestin, he said. Before she left the bloodline community and took a human name and disappeared into the south with a man no one approved of. Sophia stared at him. She was Victor Kane's granddaughter, Marcus said. Through a line I thought had ended. If your father is who you're telling me, if Emilio Marin is Emilio Valestin, then you are not a human girl who happened to be sitting on a sidewalk in District 9. Then, what am I? Sophia said. Heir to a bloodline title that Victor Kane has been looking for, Marcus said, for 23 years. He told her everything after that. In the garden, while the morning moved around them and neither of them tracked it. He told her about the Valestin bloodline, the title it carried, the governance structure it represented in the old order, and what it meant that the title had been unoccupied since Kara's disappearance in 1962. He told her about Victor Kane, who was not a villain in the cheap sense, not cruel for pleasure, not malicious for its own sake, but strategic in a way that made cruelty a tool when the calculus required it. He told her that Victor Kane discovering her had almost certainly not been an accident, that something or someone had directed his attention to Millward Street, and that the 23 years of silence had possibly been waiting, not wandering, waiting for this exact convergence. Sophia listened with her hands flat on her knees, the book closed and forgotten, her face doing the computation thing steadily for the entire 20 minutes. When he was done, she said, he wants me to claim it. He wants to control whoever claims it, Marcus said. There's a difference. How much of a difference? Everything. She looked at the wall she was sitting on. Does your mother know? I'm going to tell her now. Tell her I want to be there, Sophia said. He looked at her. Something shifted in the assessment, not re-evaluation, more like confirmation of something he'd been calculating toward without wanting to name it. All right, he said. The three of them sat in the library. The rain had come back, quieter than the night of the 14th, more personal. Ilara listened to Marcus with her hands in her lap and her face doing something Sophia recognized as the version of stillness that isn't calm. That's a person choosing not to let the size of something show on the outside. When Marcus finished, Ilara looked at Sophia. Did you know any of this? She said. No, Sophia said. But some things make more sense now. She paused. My father. The way he never looked comfortable. Like he was always waiting for something to find him. Ilara's expression did something complicated with that. He protected you, Ilara said. By making you unreachable. The South, the ordinary name, the ordinary life, he made you as invisible as he could. He made me invisible too well, Sophia said. Invisible enough to end up on a sidewalk. Ilara flinched. Small, controlled, but there. The sidewalk led here, Marcus said. It came out quieter than he intended. Both of them looked at him. He wasn't looking at either of them. He was looking at the rain on the window with an expression that was, for once, not entirely managed. The room held the weight of that for a moment. What happened next happened in stages, the way real things do, not all at once but in the way a tide comes in, gradually, and then, undeniably. Victor Kane requested a meeting. Marcus responded with terms that were not negotiable, which was a language Victor Kane understood, and which said, without saying, I am not an intermediary here, I am a party. Victor accepted. The meeting was set for the 21st day. In the 6 days before that, Marcus arranged 3 things. He arranged for a lawyer, the discreet kind, the kind who understood the specific complexities of old bloodline governance, to brief Sophia on what the Valestin title meant legally and structurally within the old order. He arranged for Ilara to tell Sophia the things about that governance he wasn't the right person to tell her, history and nuance and the interior life of the old bloodline world that required someone who'd lived it. And he arranged, without announcing it, that the East guest room would remain hers for as long as any of this was ongoing. Sophia didn't comment on any of these arrangements. She absorbed them and adjusted and kept her own counsel. She also spent time, in those 6 days, doing something Marcus hadn't organized. She spent time simply being in the house, in the kitchen with Petra, who had by day 18 started talking, actual talking, short precise sentences that turned out to contain a great deal if you listened for the shape of what was between them. In the library with Ilara, who was teaching her, gently, in the way Ilara did everything, the parts of her own history she would need in the room when she faced Victor Kane. In the garden in the evenings, where she sometimes found Marcus already there and they sometimes talked and sometimes didn't and the not talking had started to feel like a specific thing, something with weight and intention. On the 20th evening, the night before the meeting, Sophia found him in the garden again. She had noticed that he came out at the same hour most evenings, the hour when the city's light began to show above the trees, and she had started to understand that this was where he went when the calculations required silence. She sat on the wall. He stood, as usual, which she had started thinking of as a Marcus-specific architectural problem. "Tomorrow," she said. "Yes. Are you worried?" He considered this. "Victor Kane is not a danger to me. I've managed him for decades." A pause. "He is potentially a danger to things adjacent to me." "Meaning me?" "Meaning you." Sophia looked at the trees. "I've been in danger before. Not this kind. You don't know what kinds I've been in." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "True." She looked at him. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "The night on Millward Street," she said. "When Renata showed you the camera feed and you saw your mother sitting on the ground with me. What did you think?" He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. That was fine. She was patient. She had learned patience the expensive way. "I thought," he said finally, slowly, like the words were being chosen one at a time, "that I had not seen my mother look like that in a very long time. Possibly ever." A pause. "And I thought that whoever she was sitting with must be another pause." Significant. Sophia looked at him. "Before I knew anything about bloodlines or Victor Kane or any of it," he said. "I thought that." The garden was very quiet. The city glowed above the trees. Sophia didn't say anything for a moment. "I was sitting there for 3 hours before she came," Sophia said. "People walked past. Not one person stopped." She paused. "She didn't ask me anything. She just sat down. Like that was the obvious thing to do." "It was, for her," Marcus said. "She's been deciding what the obvious thing was for 3 centuries. She decided a long time ago that the obvious thing is whatever prevents someone else from feeling what she felt in 1731. And you," Sophia said. "What do you decide the obvious thing is?" He looked at her. It was darker now and his face was harder to read in the garden dark, but she had been reading him for 3 weeks and she didn't need full light anymore. "I'm deciding," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "That's the most honest thing you've said to me." "I'm generally honest," he said. Slightly defensive. She almost smiled. "You're precise," she said. "That's not the same as honest. Honest means saying the uncertain thing." He was quiet. "The uncertain thing being," she said, "that something about this house and the people in it and the last 3 weeks has turned out to matter to you in a way you didn't anticipate and that's uncomfortable because you like to anticipate things." He didn't respond immediately. The garden was still. "Yes," he said. "One word. The uncertain thing." Sophia looked at the city light above the old trees and felt the thing in her chest that had been building since the first morning, since the coffee and the toast and the library and the midnight conversations and the complicated silver-haired woman and her precise, unreadable son who had said both of you and meant it and had arranged lawyers and access and warm rooms and not once called it help. Okay, she said. The word she kept using. The word that, between her and this family, had started to carry a whole dictionary. The meeting with Victor Kane took place in a room in the old part of the city, in a building that had been neutral ground for bloodline negotiations for 150 years. Marcus brought two people with him, Ilara and Sophia. Victor Kane was old in the way that things that are very old stop looking any particular age and simply look absolute. He looked at Sophia with the eyes of a man who had waited 23 years and considered that a reasonable amount of time to wait, and he said her full name, Sophia Emilio Valestin, the bloodline name she'd never been told she had, and Sophia looked at him across the neutral room and said, calmly, with the voice of someone who had decided the certain thing and the uncertain thing and everything in between, I know who I am. She did not say it to Victor Kane. She said it to the room. To herself. To the history she'd been kept from. Victor Kane looked at her for a long time. Then, he looked at Marcus. And Marcus looked back with that face that gave nothing away except to someone who knew how to read it, and what it said was, she is not alone here. She has never been alone here. That is not going to change. Victor Kane nodded, slowly, and what the nod meant was, understood. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Sophia spoke for most of them. She had listened to Ilara for 6 days and the lawyer for 3, and she had read everything she could find in the library's particular section of old bloodline history, and she spoke with the precision and the steadiness of someone who has been preparing her whole life without knowing it, in the particular way that surviving prepares you for everything. Ilara watched her from the chair beside Marcus, and her face had that look again, that softening that no longer surprised her. The look of someone who has watched the long arc of a thing and can see, clearly, where it landed. After, in the car going home, nobody spoke for several minutes. The city went by. The evening was clear, no rain for the first time in days, the sky doing something orange and specific above the buildings. You were excellent, Ilara said quietly. Sophia looked out the window. I had good teachers. Marcus, in the front again, did not turn around. But his hands, on his knees, were not perfectly still. Later, much later, after Ilara had gone to bed and Petra had gone home and the house was at its midnight quiet, Sophia came downstairs and found the kitchen empty for once. She made tea. She stood at the counter with both hands around the cup the way she'd stood on Millward Street with her knees to her chest, the same posture but a different body now, a body that had been warm and fed and safe for 3 weeks and was beginning, cautiously, to believe that safety might not have an expiration date. She heard the garden door open. Marcus came in from outside, and he stopped when he saw her, and they looked at each other in the kitchen at midnight the way they had on that other midnight 2 weeks ago, except that this time something had shifted, settled, named itself in the garden the previous evening and wasn't unnamed anymore. He came to the counter. Stood beside her. Not performing distance and not eliminating it. Just present. Victor will acknowledge the title, he said. I know. It means things. Obligations. A whole world you've been kept from. I know. She looked at her tea. I'm not afraid of it. I know you're not. A pause. That's not what concerns me. She looked at him. What concerns me, he said carefully, is whether a world that has obligations to you but has also historically been, he stopped. Chose. Not the world that sat down beside you on the sidewalk. Sophia was quiet for a moment. You sat down beside me on the sidewalk, she said. In a manner of speaking. He looked at her. Straight, this time. Not the inventory look. The other look, the uncertain thing. Yes, he said. In a manner of speaking. Outside, the first autumn air was coming in under the door, the particular smell of the city at the end of summer when things begin to turn toward something new. The old trees in the garden made their sounds. The house held its centuries around them. Sophia put her tea down. 3 weeks ago, she said, I didn't know your name. I didn't know this house existed. I didn't know anything about bloodlines or Victor Kane or Cara Valestin or any of it. I was sitting on a street and I was cold and the city was full of people who couldn't see me. She looked at him. Your mother sat down beside me. And then, you showed up in the rain and, said both of you. A pause. That's the thing, she said. Not the bloodline. Not Victor. Not the title or the history or any of it. That's the thing I'm going to remember. That you showed up and, said both of you. Marcus Draven, who had lived for 200 years and managed bloodlines and negotiated with men like Victor Kane and built a family out of loss and kept his face still through all of it, looked at this 23-year-old girl in his kitchen at midnight and felt something move in his chest. Not many things could move it. This was one of them. And, outside, the city carried on doing what cities do endlessly, indifferently, full of people sitting on sidewalks in the rain. But, in this house, with its old trees and its warm east room and its library full of centuries, something had changed. Quietly and permanently, the way the most real changes happen. Not with drama. With a woman sitting down on wet concrete because it was the obvious thing to do. And everything after that.